The political party that is at war with women at this moment in time is undeniably the Democrat Party. This is why politics is garbage. Such lucrative political figures can exploit people under the dubious belief of social acceptance, while discounting one gender for an imaginary fiction of many genders, which is a product of critical theory and the demoralization by neo Marxism. Sexual liberation is a farce. What confounds society only enslaves it. Hedonism may bring pleasure, but it also results in absolute collapse and punishment within the desert of hyperreality. Idealism and sodomy brings, I'm afraid, human suffering. The passions of the flesh bring disease and decline of civilization. When society is misled and confounded, it is in decline. All societies that lost discipline and purpose will end. No news organization which reports politics gives you an edge. However, if you can set aside your partisan loyalty, you will clearly see that it is the imprudent bungling of idealists who empowers fanatics the extension of their decadence for representation, which harms the public because such figures promise everything and deliver themselves riches at the expense of the people. Hence, the party which calls itself a democrat society, in which such a system of corruption hired criminals to coerce the public, is never more a faction of cult members who assume a legion of bloodthirsty savages that will obey their demands. Beware of the political figure who cries out that America is a democracy, that it needs more democracy, or that the republic is destroying democracy, which is a lie. Democracy brings ostracism, death by public without trial, legal statewide prostitution, hedonism, endless civil war, fraudulent elections, socialism/communism, riots, the rise in drugs and murder by the people, and finally, the decline of a nation which allows it to be conquered by a ruthless foreign successor. Democracies are the most vile of systems and governments. Such vices of humanity self implode. People are forever ruined. For example, if we want to see a faction of radicals, such as Antifa, we find that they tend to be defenders of Nambla. I must say that Antifa is truly a terrorist international Stalinist commie group that likes underage children or protects those sorts of people. I find them quite disgusting. The conceptualizing of identity has been rather problematic, since culture gravitates to political labels rather than understand human beings at their mental capacity at the scientific level. Thereby, any indulgence that has been established by the sole factor of sex drive, which can be harmful, is promoted by lucrative intentions of the university system, which confuse the student, trying to discover their place within an abundance of depraved ideas, which are never articulated, explained, but vaguely attributed as accepting to the point of marketability. The mere fact that society is forced by compelled speech and conceptualizing genders as hyperreal topics begs one to question the trolling aspect of some academic Marxists who enjoy watching people confusing themselves for their enjoyment. Complete societal breakdown is a nasty goal. People pay the price, and they don't know why. The educational system continues to make children into radicalized Bolsheviks who will only commit themselves in destroying the country through more riots and violence. And sadly, the Communist Teachers Union is pushing their communist agenda. Since the 1930s, the Soviet Marxist Leninists have infiltrated our unions to demoralize and bankrupt our nation, and to deindustrialize our nation to have communist nations like China or Russia, in the case of the former Soviet Union, take over as a centralized power. The leftists are too stupid to figure it out because they like their struggle session, their form of coercion, their social engineering, in other words, their power. This means that the political power structure is all that matters to Marxist radicals. The followers of critical theory have desired that critical race theory is producing useful individuals for the manifestation of the communist end goal, globalism. The NEA really enjoys creating the conditions for perpetual racism. This will only continue profiting the grievance industry, which will only be harming individuals which conceptualizing societal violence. The progressives have always been quite moronic in their approach. Marxism, of course, is the rejection of morality. And yet so many people are idiotic to the point that they wear the hammer and sickle, not realizing that Marxist-Leninists rejected morality. If the Bolsheviks were moralists, they would have never murdered the Romanovs. The more extreme leftist policies swing into obscurity, the quicker the pendulum will shift to traditionalism, because bloodshed and depravity has punished the public based on their delusions. The more riots, the more destruction. The quicker that the normality of culture will require law and order. The decline of culture only happens because people are not willing to correct the course of society. By having people speak out against the conceptualists who reside in the bowers of paradise, it is far more prudent to base reality on the earth-bound structure of nature, which has foundation, which has order, and which genetics has only two outcomes. The social invention of the tabulation of concepts, people that want to use gender as the social construct to identify with the fantasy world. It requires that men and women are to be taught that their feelings are clouding their reason, for which the establishment wishes it to be so. They clearly do not want individuals to look within themselves, to self-identify based on a reality that they can see, but rather that they want them to feel. And that goes into the whole principle of conceptualization. People like abstract terms. That's a problem. Anomalies can occur, but it isn't due to nature, but the conditions of genetic manipulation and the DNA code bearing mistakes. Since copulation had two subjects which had reproductive problems and for which the cell division was compromised due to the makeup of the embryo. Cell division can have problems at times. It really depends upon the parents and how their alleles, how their genetics, their makeup, the process of which the baby is being made can have defects, and that does happen. But let's go away from genetics. I mean, I would have to really dig into it to make plenty of sense for the listener of this podcast. Let's focus primarily on women. Now, the Democrat Party has made women as second-class citizens. A man can lie and wear a wig, being given the pinnacle of power while they are sexual predators. This is quite dangerous. The moment a man insists that they are the opposite gender, it is mainly to avoid the history of debt fraud or criminal actions that he may engage in, or may have been convicted of. This should open your eyes that I never really wanted to consider how powerful conceptualism would jeopardize the safety of our society, since many people have gravitated to overexposure to the porn industry as a stimuli. What was entertainment has now become hyper real and has made our society susceptible to prostitutes and which they escort themselves, present themselves in various ways by that old profession. With social media, TikTok, Twitter, it is to say that lobbyists and corrupt politicians have impressed the amount of protection that overstimulated people by overuse of porn provided an expression of critical theory and force and decency toward the public. This is a danger to the well being of our culture, as some parts of local government protect rapists, as well as sexual predators, since they are bribing politicians, political figures, who in turn do the same. In other words, they can protect themselves. The more you examine culture, the eviler you'll see it. The evil group Antifa supports pedophilia. This is quite scary. This communist Stalinist group are not only idiotic but extremely stupid. They refer to anyone opposing their idiotic stance as fascist. But of course, the communists inside Antifa support evil people because they themselves are pure evil. They are on par with the Nazis. They even use the same colors as the Nazis, red and black. Antifa supports NAMBLA, which is a lobby group for pedos, as I mentioned earlier. Classical philosophy, sadly, is dismissed because people prefer deceiving themselves. Thus, their reality is not one that is founded, but one that is stimulated by their fetishes. A simulation, as you will. The people that give into their impulses of fleshly desires are no longer a human being, but one that is unreasonable in their pursuits and harmful to themselves in the short and long term, because eventually it is only done to conceal their criminality. In this case, this deranged man who kidnap women to skin them alive and wear their skins to be the woman he will never be is mentally deranged. We see this with Buffalo Bill as a figurative example. People that prefer concepts over understanding within humanity are quite dangerous. And they should be watched carefully. The ignorance of the leftists, which disparage the ancient world of philosophy because it is incompatible with their ideas, today, due to German philosophers and French thinkers, we must consider that such people have lost their identity for something artificial, and that the simulacra that they embrace is an imitation, not one that is genuine. These terms are used to designate the theories that have been proposed as solutions, and one of the most important questions in philosophy, often referred to as the problem of universals, which still was a favorite subject for discussion in ancient times, and especially in the Middle Ages. It is still prominent in modern and contemporary philosophy. We propose to discuss this in the article, The Nature of the Problem and the Suggested Solutions, the Principal Historical Forms of Nominalism, Realism, and Conceptualism, the Claims of Moderate Realism. Classical philosophy, religiosity, metaphysics have already tackled the issues of today. But since people are too lazy to understand the complexity of human nature, they devolve into savages and brutes, and embodying themselves into monsters more than man. We have seen that pride parades have gone way too far with their sick and twisted, indecent exposure of promoting sexual imagery to the public. It is quite illegal. And what these marches are endorsing is quite disgusting. These people that have the need to portray themselves as sexual symbols while doing the act of sex in public aren't fooling anyone. It is much the same in the line of heterosexualism, which indecent exposure is not acceptable. Selfishness of sexuality, based on preference that must be punished into the public, I'm sorry, not punished, but pushed into the public, is quite awful, and one that should be ashamed. Using the excuse that is one is inclined to personal proclivity of sexual endorsements, that does not excuse the immoral actions of political representation. For instance, we saw this case with Vosh, for instance, when Vosh was screaming against deviant pedophiles, banning them for their disgusting nature in his live webcast podcast. It goes to show you that people on the ultra left wing are just disgusted with the criminality of other people's behavior, and the left wing does not want to be aligned with such individuals. But the issue at hand is that many have devolved into conceptualism, which is a big problem. The whole identity of their self-political embodiment, and not of a community which is of human rights, but one of criminal portrayals. Vosh, by the way, is a leftist who is somewhat, in my opinion, a commie. To hear him say that there should be boundaries of him having banned all the sick and twisted pedos on his stream is rather good. Leftism needs to stop supporting bizarre criminal ideology, and they gotta stop supporting the absurdity of pride parades because it is quite disgusting. Not in the sense that people have the ability to have private affairs with individuals in an adult setting, behind closed doors, in private. That's fine. The issue at hand is the boundary of which individuals go too far with their sodomy, with their bestiality, and some individuals are quite fond of the criminal action of pedophilia. The mere fact that people on the left support this depraved hedonism, since they want to portray themselves as liberal and accepting, shows me that these individuals do not have a moral compass or the boundaries of sound policy. Bestiality and pedophilia, as I mentioned before, is a criminal offense, and it should not be endorsed at all. Having children being exposed to kink in the public environments, in which the public is the state, puts strain upon the citizens of the state. The horrible truth of these individuals that support such causes, quite honestly, were abused as children. And to compensate for any sort of trauma, they will support causes that wash away any of the personal demons to justify a recurring monstrosity that was incurred upon them. The whole movement, in honesty, is a political farce, in which laws are discounted and where governments and corporations support criminal actions to avoid litigation by evil people. Leaders of social causes are frauds. You do more harm. Let me rephrase that. You do more by doing nothing. A good government does good when it does nothing. A good government is when the people do not force the hand of bureaucracy to will things into existence. Therefore, the economic prosperity and the opportunity that is to be pushed is strongest when no radicalism is endorsed. When delusional people who want to appear good pretend to be good and endorse the actions of pure evil, thinking it is for the greater cause, it holds truth that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Supporting the wickedness of vindictive people has never been so popular. And as we have seen in these last few years, narcissism and delusion is sadly a badge of virtue. The left, enjoy strutting like a loud peacock. Now, many have regretted supporting these fads, as the truth revealed to them that they have been had. The poor were not helped, the people suffered, and the mob rioted and looted for their own vanity. For instance, in the case of George Floyd, a criminal was made a martyr, and thus the Church of Woke is nevermore the very Baphomet held. Education, they claim, is a right, that they are to imbue themselves upon critical race theory. But the truth is, education is not a right. It is merely one compelling another to believe and accept what society deems to service itself. Therefore, education is neither a human right nor a privilege, since human beings learn with or without institutions, and instead, by experiencing life, are allowed an actual education, not founded by an artificial environment that does more to impoverish than enrich, but that if one wanted to learn how to discern and question, it is far better to be able to be resourceful than limited and confined to peer pressure from delusional men who do more to inhale each other's flatulence than explore one's reason. The us versus them is the oldest form of fraud that establishment pushes when it comes to manufactured division. A child is not born racist and genuinely wants to play with their friends who are of different cultures and ethnic groups. Kids don't care about skin color. Idiotic adults do. The school system makes those kids, by telling them what racism is and who are the racial supremacists. This is not only dangerous, this is the same sort of evil that Germany and China did to circumvent a culture, producing struggle session while confiscating property. When they have to make children's books about Marxism and racism, producing social justice warriors, promoting the welfare state, and protesting the government, you know exactly the type of evil that is being pushed. Some leftists may argue that it is for the greater good. How so? Do you think burning down cities is justice? The protesters really mean it with their social threat: no justice, no peace. These brainwashed men and women are as fanatical as the Bolsheviks and the Nazis. And the worst thing is that these businesses will support it because they think the same people destroying their businesses will somehow magically stop the moment they put a support sticker. This is why democracy is pure evil. And this is why the communists use democracy as a dog whistle, because of enough idiots get together, they can destroy themselves, while the fraudsters, they can collect property and money, while the dumb minions, the useful idiots, get nothing. The problem with communist radicals is that they are intellectually dishonest about their worldwide goal. International socialism, of which globalism desires, is absolute imperialism. The communist subversion only seeks to bring foreign nations a subtle form of warfare without having to fire a single bullet, because the public nations are often akin to a society of Smurf-like, blue stupid creatures that can be sold the principle of fighting the idea of imperialism while creating at the same exact time the need for international egalitarians who want to restore world empire. On a different note, if we look into another side of culture which is problematic, the exhibition of pornography in public, I must say, is awful. Now, going back to the pride parades, and especially when you have parades and conventions exposing the degeneracy of desperate people, if I don't want to see heterosexuals heterosexuals having sex in public or showing themselves like a meat market, them dangling from a meat hook, why on earth would I want to see others giving carte blanche? The LGBTQ have been given free rein to promote the same. Have some dignity and consider that I don't want to see people copulating each other in public. It isn't cute, it is quite criminal behavior. This applies to heterosexuals. Homosexuals, heterosexuals having sex in public is a crime. You shouldn't do it. But yet, you have absolute idiots that think it is wonderful and edgy. These sort of people watch all types of porn all day, all night. The truth is, nobody wants to see people make out in public or spoon each other. It's kind of sick. It's disgusting. It also goes into this topic of having, parents with their children in their lap. It's gross. They shouldn't do it. It's not cute. So stop. You know, having a man plastered all over the place with multiple dildos isn't pride. It's a show of indecent exposure and just poor judgment. I understand that their priorities is to show people that they are liberated in terms of their sexuality, but I don't see it that way. They're wrong. Those people are without any form of principle. It reminds me of the decadence of the hippies who got young girls and got them drugged during the 60s, during the Summer of Love. The flower children were abused, they were raped by disgusting men. And they were trying to go about saying that it was the new age of enlightenment, that somehow they wanted to stimulate their chakras. They were high in LSD. They were drug addicts. They were horrible human beings. The lower self has ruined men of integrity. They have made them decrepit, desperate. Too much porn ruins a man, as it has made both men and women complete whores. Pride is as corrupt as the amoral nature of a corrupt church. Although this is no longer about using God as the go to blame things, it is now about being woke for the nihilistic purpose of debauchery and unrestrained selfishness. This idea in which you use deity as a symbol, blaming God for all the ills of humanity, is now embraced. God is absent from the equation. You have human beings who are now striving to push the animalistic behavior and vices of savagery. People are no longer civilized. Rather than using, of course, a metaphysical argument of a deity being higher in the higher form of mankind, above in the super hierarchy, you don't have that anymore. What you have is undisciplined people who are more concerned about whipping out their junk or shaking their butt. The truth is, whether you're gay or straight, no one wants to see a man's hairy ass, especially if he's dressed as a Weimar officer. It's repulsive. It's disgusting. I don't want to see it. It's not cute. There is nothing attractive about the selfishness of people that they want to use the argument that they're sexually repressed, that they have to celebrate a fiction that doesn't exist. I understand that sex is sex, but like I said before, keep it private. Remember, sexual liberation is a fallacy, since sexual enslavement comes with whips and chains. Here's what I think, what I really think. No deception, just the truth. I don't care what people think about me. In spite of my opinion, I know that some people have taken not the time to ponder ideas or to witness the self as a character from the eyes of another. Do we really understand human nature? To be right all the time is to be foolish and wrong. But those who seek personal power, it is that they spin their own web, and they are the most grotesque of an acrid. They desire one to give themselves penetration of their entrails, fillet themselves, or worship the illusion of what a wonderful person they are by their sodomy. No matter how separated their ideas are, tolerance has denied anyone the ability to issue them truth. Sophomoric is he that the belief rests in delusion. The identity of himself, the ideas from, let's say, cinema, lyrics of popular music, or the depravity of literature can form opinion from best to worst and give the poison to love oneself with the embrace of the self and only the self. We find that this problem is paramount in athletes and musicians. And I must ask, why should you worship a narcissist? People are already themselves quite narcissistic. And then we have this thing with polite society. Polite society is like wagging a gentleman's war when wars cannot be won conventionally. The culture is like sitting ducks, a sitting row of ducks. No mind of their own, just mindless drones with no purpose, no vision, no freedom, no mind. Wanting to appear as a good person by the stratagem of endorsing one population as open-minded lends itself in exposing children to copulation, which is evil. In its complete explicitness and provocative nature, it is by its very philosophical argument an evil which will discount the boundaries and promote extreme abuses within the lives of children, making them mentally damaged and making them believe an adult delusion for their grotesque selfish desires. Because people are not inherently good, they will push themselves into evil positions because they haven't a strong moral compass or the ability to restrain themselves from vices. The fallacy of people is that they argue that they are perfectly fine with allowing other people's offspring the ability to present themselves as cabaret dancers or strippers, but soon contradict themselves when it comes to their own children. The society desires to appear accepting, but at the same time, this is an inner struggle in which people know what is wrong. But the selfishness and responsibility of the neo generation, they don't care about anything but sexual liberation, in which many such people do not have sexual intercourse with anyone because they are quite honestly creeps. They, gosh, what they do is the actions of rapists, of pedophiles, of drug-induced escorts. They're quite stupid. And the stupidity of the public wanting to have constant sex is repulsive and irresponsible. What I see in this culture is that there is no boundaries. That's scary. The people in this day and age, not all, but a fringe part of it, they're obsessed with their arousal and they're not concerned about the consequences of their foolish actions. What you have are people that warrant unwanted pregnancies, psychological abuses, and destroyed marriages. Sexual liberation is actually mental enslavement to vice and flesh. This notion that adults desiring children is beyond wrong for the purpose of corrupting the youth to amatoria, by confusing the children by his or her identity for political representation on the whims of what is acceptable in a society by gender pronouns, which has no boundaries because it is foolishly asserted itself as liberal, it is a dangerous means to an end by the end to its means. Pedophilia and bestiality is wrong, yet more imbeciles are pushing the goal more and more. When irresponsible parents expose their children to pride parades, despite the amount of eroticism that is portrayed, such people only do so because they think they're being good people. The irresponsible nature of these parents will accelerate the mental capacity of having further dissolved boundaries, and such hedonism will expand. Because of the abusive nature of people, they will continue pushing their obsession with appearing good hearted, noble, by allowing their children to be subjected to rapists, in which case they will grow up to be rapists themselves. How is this morally good? The issue with many people is that they blame religion, failing to understand that their own newly founded tenets are religious in nature. However, it is more based on their selfish desires rather than raising a moral person, giving them the ability to think rationally. Even worse is that the stupid intellectuals make their contrarian notion as a defiance against deity. But what they are really doing is ruining themselves and the lives of their children. Gendered pronouns are indeed delusional titles for mentally ill people. We see plenty of idiotic celebrities and politicians who bend themselves over for society. So it commits upon them this sodomy of a human centipede like a human locomotive. It's disgusting. Gendered pronouns is nothing more than a steam powered train speeding off a cliff. The majority of grievance studies that we have seen over the years, besides the topics of sexism, which go on to become published in respected school journals, are farcical and based on trolling. Thereby, the idiots of the university who are quick to publish them without proper discernment think that they have somehow discovered a new way of looking at the world, even though the whole damn thing was a sick joke. But since students don't understand how to question or think, they simply trust the bullshit given. Corporations, too, are quick to adopt absurd ideas, just as gendered pronouns, which were pranks from university trolls. But sadly, the student environment are subjected to a free-for-all retardism of tolerance and acceptance without considering that topics are to be questioned as either illegitimate or illegitimate. We try to base things on logical reasoning, but that doesn't happen. In universities, if the bullshit is funny, it sticks, and the colleges will promote it. It is lucrative as it is dishonest. Students in general are quite stupid, and most of the time, the shit that they write is not rational, well formed, or based on empirical data. These dumb idiots go on to become professors that give a performance of mental masturbation rather than teach subjects that are methodical and specific. When universities start pushing degree programs in social justice and Marxist studies, you have to wonder why they haven't caught the shitlords who do it for the purpose of trolling the systems. Yeah, there are brilliant people who trick the system, and nobody is none the wiser. If you don't believe me, one need only look at TikTok to give you the mentality of the public of today, which take their bullshit quite serious. I don't like what the mainstream likes. Although I appreciate an artist or an author, I don't enjoy the interpretation of the masses because I know they are more concerned with narratives and simple tropes, the cultist tidings or absurd perversions from imitators who are repeaters. I view everything as a business model. The motto and propaganda doesn't really work unless it is an actual product that makes my abilities and intellect craft together something that is discernible ideology. But I try more to stick with what is real rather than what is conceptual, because concepts, they cause a lot of issues. I fancy essays that can stimulate my fellow man to ask circumstantial questions, and which case they question the very systems they live in without giving them an illusion or prism which can break apart the mental capacity into various factors of irrationality, otherwise circumventing the method of science itself by corrupting the individual with absurd notions. My thirst for understanding the world is more important than supporting the tribal cause of primitive aims. I'm not interested in artificial utopia, but the discovery and adventure of the world. I am not interested in pleasing any cults with their profane limitations. I know that cultish people in the world are foolish. They're not wise. It is better to be an observer of the world and understand why things happen. But the issue with people is that they're obsessed with themselves as appearing good, wholesome, and decent. These deceptive terms like tolerant, free spirit, diversity, accepting, and liberal are anything but true. If we really look at individuals, we find the opposite of what they claim to be. The foolish quest to white knight for righteousness as a society is as foolish as Don Quixote fighting a windmill, thinking that it is a dragon. Wanting to be good by accepting one's passion only makes one a complete fool. The desires of the flesh is the doorway to personal hell, and there's nothing good about selfishness of the genitals. People are very fond of their penis or their vagina. They're sick, they're fascinated by it. It's repulsive. They shouldn't be thinking about that, but people do because that's the only thing that they have that brings them pleasure. It only leads them to ruin once the euphoria wears off. Although emotions are self centered, individualistic, the whole act of committing suicide due to a loss of a partner or high tension state of depression, of melancholy, doesn't give you the excuse to end your own life because one has been corrupted by an excessive amount of pornography because they're not getting that sort of stimulus. I would advise be an adult and stop being an emotional child. Life is not about having sex all the time. And I want you to understand that pornography is harmful to the mind. It corrupts people. It makes people quite stupid. It makes them irresponsible. Stop watching porn. Not only will it destroy the inner family, but in truth, it will affect opinions of individuals who think that fantasy is based upon reality. And people will move and not care about truth. They will care about, as Oprah said, their truth. And that is a fallacious idea. Truth is not subjective. I want you to understand that. There are people that try to say that it is, but they're wrong. They're foolish. They don't understand anything about metaphysics. They don't understand anything about philosophy. They're full of shit. It's plain simple. But if you must be selfish, be sure to do something amazing that will be of importance as a contribution to humanity, like an invention, or if you want to be quite selfish, a sacrifice to save humanity by an act of heroism in a war. I don't think there's a good purpose to have oneself become a victim of genocide by another nation, but nonetheless, if that's what you want, I would not advise suicide. To commit suicide is to throw the precious lifespan that you are given by nature. Committing suicide only hurts your bloodline, it hurts your family. So, in all honesty, if you have mental problems because of your excessive obsession with porn or because you're confused with your gender because you don't know anything about identity, don't take your life. Try to understand that people are cruel and unkind. Humanity doesn't owe you anything. Life is unfair, and opportunities are few and not guaranteed. Learn to be defiant and to say no to convention, and also that you are not here to please anyone. Remember, people are fucked up and evil, but learn to be a dick to those who are always trying to push you down. Be strong willed and unapologetic to the stupidity of culture. Our new generation is mentally ill. The future leaders of this country have preemptively failed us before even trying. The school system should be called what it really is. School is a mental asylum. The faculty is deranged and without course, while the students are without discipline and academic rigor. Developing worldviews in college is dangerous because the environment of college is artificial. It is dependent on deceiving their clients, who are obsessed with acquiring a bill of debt called a degree. The establishment of charlatans convinced the straw man that he or she needed a diploma, a degree to be intelligent. How fitting. The good intentions of people is irrelevant when the people end up suffering due to unplanned outcomes by hopes and dreams. The problem is that communism doesn't offer any solution, neither does decadence. It doesn't even know how to get there. Communism doesn't know how to solve problems. It just pretends to give you a utopia. Utopia means nowhere. What it does instead is enslave society under a despotism more tyrannical than the government that preceded it. Usually, the more decadent and idiotic the people, the easier it is to get the vote. And with the people's permission to pass utopian visions that never materialize, this is why people were absolute fools to believe charlatans like Bernard Sanders and the rest of the current Democrat Party, which pushes progressive policies that have no solution. When the labor unions and workers were neglected, a nation's well being was casted aside for political lingo and self identity. You have just witnessed that the party is more concerned with self delusion than someone's ability to provide for the whole state of prudent taxation, which is voted by the people. A state becomes sloppy if it is always Democrat or Republican, because complacency is a usage of fraud visible. The more unicameral, the more fraud.